Good to see you. Tonight's tale moves at a calm, nap-friendly pace. Picture this. You're standing in a Hungarian village in the winter of 1241, watching your breath form clouds in the bitter air, completely unaware that you're about to witness one of history's most terrifying invasions. The snow crunches beneath your feet as you tend to your daily chores, perhaps feeding the pigs or mending a roof damaged by the recent storms. You have no idea that thousands of miles away, decisions have already been made that will turn your quiet world into a frozen nightmare. You probably won't survive this, but let's see how long you can last in one of medieval Europe's darkest winters. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing our little global community come together for these historical journeys. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're living in a world where news travels at the speed of a horse, where winter means potential starvation, and where the concept of a Mongol is as foreign to you as a smartphone would be to Genghis Khan. Your village sits somewhere in the Hungarian plains, a collection of wooden houses, with thatched roofs surrounded by fields that lie dormant under a blanket of snow. The year 1241 has been harsh, colder than usual, with storms that seem to bite through your wool cloak like it's made of spider webs. But there's something different about this winter. The merchants who usually pass through your village have stopped coming. The last trader you saw was a nervous man from the east who kept glancing over his shoulder and muttering about devils on horseback. You dismissed it as the ravings of someone who'd spent too much time alone on the road, but now you notice the silence. Even the birds seem to have abandoned the area. Your daily routine continues regardless. You wake before dawn, break the ice on your water barrel, and begin that endless cycle of survival that defines peasant life. The local lord's castle sits on a hill overlooking your village, its stone walls offering the illusion of protection. You've never questioned whether those walls could actually keep anything out. They've always just been there, as permanent as the mountains themselves. The first sign that something is wrong comes not from the east, where danger supposedly lurks, but from the behavior of the animals. Your livestock grows restless, refusing to settle in their enclosures. Dogs bark at empty horizons. Horses stamp and whinny for no apparent reason. You've heard old wives' tales about animals sensing earthquakes or storms, but this feels different. This feels like they're afraid of something that hasn't arrived yet. Historians still argue whether the Mongols deliberately timed their invasions to coincide with winter, or if it was simply tactical convenience. What's certain is that they understood something your medieval mind couldn't grasp. Winter wasn't just a season to endure, it was a weapon to be wielded. While you're focused on staying warm and fed, they're planning to use the frozen ground as highways for their cavalry and the shortened daylight hours as cover for their movements. The monastery bells ring out across the landscape, calling the faithful to prayer, but even their familiar sound seems muffled by the oppressive atmosphere. You join the other villagers in the small church, where the priest delivers the same sermon about endurance and faith that you've heard countless times. But tonight his words carry a new weight. He speaks of trials and tribulations with the fervor of someone who senses approaching catastrophe. As you walk home through the snow-covered streets, you notice your neighbors whispering in small groups, their conversations dying when you approach. The blacksmith mentions strange lights on the horizon. The miller's wife swears she heard distant thunder, even though the sky is clear. These fragments of unease weave together into a tapestry of dread that you can't quite understand but can't ignore. Your small wooden house feels smaller tonight, its walls thinner against the cold. You bank the fire carefully, knowing that fuel is precious and the night will be long. Outside, the wind howls through the bare branches of the elm tree that shades your home in summer. But mixed with that familiar sound is something else, a rhythm that doesn't quite match the natural cadence of winter storms. You pull your blanket tighter and try to sleep, but rest eludes you. In the distance, barely audible over the wind, you hear what might be the sound of horses, lots of horses, moving fast, moving this way. You wake to a sound that doesn't belong in your world, the rhythmic thunder of thousands of hooves on frozen ground. It's still dark, that deep winter darkness that makes you question whether dawn will ever come, but something has changed. The air itself feels different, charged with an energy that makes your skin crawl. You stumble to your small window, scraping away the frost with your fingernails, and peer out into the pre-dawn gloom. What you see defies comprehension. The horizon usually empty except for the occasional merchant caravan or traveling monk is alive with movement. Dark shapes flow across the landscape like a living shadow, and as your eyes adjust, you realize you're watching an army unlike anything you've ever imagined. These aren't the knights you've seen in the Lord's service, clanking along in their heavy armor at the pace of a leisurely stroll. This is something else, entirely a force that moves with the fluid grace of a wolf pack and the inexorable power of a flood. The Mongol army approaching your village numbers around 30,000 warriors, though your medieval mind has no framework for comprehending such massive numbers. To you, anything beyond a few hundred people represents an incomprehensible multitude. But what's truly terrifying isn't the size, it's the coordination. These riders move in perfect formation, even at speed, their movements synchronized in a way that suggests a level of military organization that Europe won't match for centuries. You can make out individual riders now, and they're nothing like the warriors you know. No gleaming plate armor, no colorful banners fluttering in the wind. Instead, you see compact men in practical leather and fur, riding sturdy horses that seem to barely touch the ground. Each rider carries a bow, and you notice with growing horror that they're all stringing arrows as they approach. This isn't a marching army, it's a hunting party, and you're the prey. The sound grows louder, and you realize it's not just hooves you're hearing. There's a musical quality to it, a rhythm that speaks of practiced efficiency. The Mongols are using their traditional method of communication, whistles, horn calls, and the subtle body language of riders who've spent their entire lives in the saddle. It's like watching a conversation conducted at full gallop, and the topic of discussion is your village's imminent destruction. Your neighbor burst through your door without knocking, his face pale with terror. "They're coming," he gasps, though you can see that for yourself. The priest says we should ring the bells, warn the others. But even as he speaks, you both know it's too late for warnings. The Mongols are perhaps a mile away now, close enough that you can see the vapor rising from their horses' nostrils, close enough to make out the individual faces of the riders. Historians still argue whether the Mongols' reputation for speed was exaggerated by terrified chroniclers, but what you're witnessing suggests the stories were, if anything, understated. These horses seem to glide over the frozen ground, their riders barely moving in their saddles. It's a level of horsemanship that makes your local cavalry look like children playing with wooden toys. The strangest part is the silence among the riders themselves. No battle cries, no shouted orders, no chaos of an approaching army. They communicate through gestures and signals with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. It's this quiet professionalism that makes them so terrifying they're not charging into battle in a fit of rage or religious fervor. They're simply doing their job, and their job is conquest. You grab your few valuable possessions, a small silver cross, a pouch of coins, the knife your father gave you, and stuff them into a bag. Your hands are shaking, whether from cold or fear you can't tell. The approaching army has split into smaller groups, now each heading toward a different part of your village. It's a tactical deployment that speaks of careful planning and intimate knowledge of the local terrain. The first arrows begin to fall while the riders are still several hundred yards away. These aren't the heavy crossbow bolts you've seen in local conflicts, but lighter, faster projectiles that seem to whistle through the air like deadly birds. One thuds into your doorframe, and you notice the craftsmanship. The arrowhead is beautifully made, more precise than anything your local blacksmith could produce. The monastery bells finally begin to ring their bronze voices, carrying across the winter landscape in a desperate call for divine intervention. But the sound seems thin and fragile against the approaching thunder of hooves. Your priest, bless his heart, is probably kneeling before his altar right now, praying for a miracle. Unfortunately, the Mongols are the miracle, just not the kind anyone in your village was hoping for. As the first riders reach the outskirts of your village, you see something that will haunt your dreams for years to come. They're smiling. Not the cruel grins of bloodthirsty barbarians, but the satisfied expressions of craftsmen who take pride in their work. They've done this before hundreds of times, and they're very good at it. The systematic destruction of your world is about to begin, and you're witnessing the moment when medieval Europe first encountered the military machine that conquered half the known world. The riders are close enough now that you can see their breath steaming in the cold air, close enough to notice that their horses are barely winded despite the long approach. The first scream cuts through the morning air like a blade through silk, and suddenly your world explodes into chaos. You watch from your window as the lead Mongol riders sweep into your village with the precision of a hawk diving for prey. There's no dramatic charge, no wild battle cry, just the methodical efficiency of professional soldiers doing what they do best. The rider nearest to you nocks an arrow, draws his bow, and releases in one fluid motion that takes less time than a heartbeat. The arrow finds its mark in old Henrik the baker, who was stumbling from his shop with a sack of flour clutched to his chest. What strikes you most isn't the violence itself, but the complete absence of anger or hatred in the attackers' faces. These men aren't driven by revenge or religious fervor. They're simply following orders with the same workmanlike attitude you might bring to harvesting grain. A young Mongol warrior, probably no older than yourself, rides past your house while systematically shooting arrows into anything that moves. His expression is almost bored, like he's done this so many times that it's become routine. The coordination is what makes it truly terrifying. You count at least 50 riders in the first wave, and they move like they're performing a choreographed dance. Some focus on the larger buildings, others target anyone trying to flee, while a third group circles the village perimeter to catch escapees. No one shouts instructions. They simply know their roles in this deadly ballet. It's the kind of tactical sophistication that European armies won't develop for another 2 centuries. Your neighbor's house erupts in flames, and you realize the Mongols are using fire arrows, another innovation that your medieval world has never encountered. The thatch roof catches instantly, sending orange flames licking into the gray winter sky. The smoke carries the acrid smell of burning straw mixed with something else, something that makes your stomach turn. You don't want to think about what else might be burning in there. The sound of splintering wood tells you they've reached the blacksmith's shop. Through your frosted window, you see 2 riders working together with practiced efficiency. One holds the horses, while the other ransacks the building, tossing anything valuable into a leather sack. They're not mindless destroyers. They're selective in their looting, taking only what's useful or portable. The rest they leave for the flames. Historians still argue whether the Mongols' reputation for systematic destruction was propaganda or reality, but from your hiding spot, it looks disturbingly methodical. They're not just attacking randomly, they're following a plan. Someone has studied your village layout, identified the key buildings, and assigned specific tasks to different groups. It's military science applied to a scale you never imagined possible. You hear footsteps on your roof and realize with growing horror that some of the riders have dismounted. They're moving from house to house now, clearing each building with the thoroughness of hunters tracking wounded prey. The sound of boots on thatch directly above your head makes you hold your breath until your lungs burn. A piece of burning straw falls through a gap in your roof, landing on your wooden floor with a soft hiss. The door to your house explodes inward, and you find yourself face to face with a Mongol warrior. He's smaller than you expected, probably a full head shorter than the local men, but there's something in his eyes that makes your blood freeze. Not cruelty exactly, but a kind of professional assessment, like he's evaluating livestock at a market. His equipment is beautifully made. His bow looks like it was crafted by master artisans, and even his leather armor shows a level of craftsmanship that puts your local products to shame. He says something in a language that sounds like wind through dry grass, then gestures with his bow toward the door. The meaning is clear enough: move or die. You stumble toward the exit, your legs barely supporting your weight, while he follows close behind. Once outside, you see the full scope of the destruction. Your village, which took generations to build, is being systematically dismantled in minutes. The efficiency is breathtaking in its horror. One group of riders has herded all the livestock into a central area, while another has rounded up the surviving villagers. You notice they're being selective about who they kill. The young and healthy are being separated from the old and infirm. It's a coldly practical approach that speaks to their experience in these matters. A fascinating detail catches your attention, even in your terror. The Mongols are using different types of arrows for different purposes. The ones they use against people are lighter and faster, designed for maximum penetration. The fire arrows have specially designed heads that carry burning material, and you spot some riders carrying what look like heavier arrows, probably meant for use against armor or fortifications. It's a level of specialization that would impress your local bowyer if he were still alive. The whole raid takes less than an hour. By the time the sun has fully risen, your village has been transformed from a living community into a smoking ruin. The Mongols have gathered their loot, secured their prisoners, and are already preparing to move on to the next target. You watch in stunned silence as they mount their horses with the same casual efficiency they brought to the destruction. As they ride away, you notice something that chills you more than the winter air. They're not celebrating their victory. There's no whooping or cheering, no sense of accomplishment. They're already focused on the next task, the next village, the next conquest. To them, what just happened wasn't a battle. It was simply Tuesday morning's work. The riders disappear over the horizon as quickly as they came, leaving behind a silence so complete it makes your ears ring. You stand among the smoldering ruins of your village, surrounded by scattered bodies and the acrid smell of smoke, trying to process what you've just witnessed. The winter wind carries ash and the distant sound of horses, another group of Mongols perhaps, or maybe just the echo of your shattered nerves. Either way, staying here means certain death when they return, and you know with bone-deep certainty that they will return. You're not alone in this realization. From behind overturned carts and collapsed buildings, other survivors begin to emerge like frightened rabbits. There's Maria, the weaver, clutching her infant son so tightly you worry she might suffocate him. Old Willem the carpenter limps forward, blood seeping through his torn tunic. A handful of children, their faces streaked with soot, and tears cling to any adult they can find. Perhaps 20 people from a village of over 100. The arithmetic of survival is brutal and simple. The decision to flee into the forest isn't really a decision at all. It's an instinct as primal as breathing. The woods have always been dangerous, full of wolves and bandits, and the kind of bone-deep cold that can kill a person in their sleep. But at least the forest's dangers are familiar. You know how to build a shelter, how to find food, how to avoid the predators that hunt in darkness. The Mongols, on the other hand, are a completely unknown quantity devils on horseback who follow no rules you understand. Willem, despite his injuries, takes charge with the natural authority of someone who's spent decades solving practical problems. We need to move before they circle back, he says, his voice steady despite the blood on his lips. Take only what you can carry. Food, warm clothes, anything that burns. It's good advice, though. There's precious little left to take. The Mongols were thorough in their looting, and what they didn't steal, they burned. The forest edge is only half a mile from your village, but it feels like the longest walk of your life. You keep expecting to hear hoofbeats behind you, keep imagining arrows whistling through the air. Every shadow could hide a Mongol scout. Every sound could herald another attack. Your small group moves in frightened silence, the children's whimpers muffled by their mother's hands. The tree line, when you finally reach it, feels like crossing into another world. The bare branches overhead filter the weak winter sunlight into a gray twilight that matches your mood. Here at least, the Mongol cavalry can't operate with their usual devastating efficiency. The closely packed trees will force them to dismount to fight on foot where their advantages disappear. It's a small comfort, but you'll take any advantage you can get. Willem leads you deeper into the woods, following deer paths that twist between ancient oaks and towering pines. The snow is deeper here, untouched by human passage, and each step sends a shock of cold through your worn boots. You can already feel the moisture seeping through the leather, and you know that frostbite will be as dangerous as any Mongol arrow in the days to come. Finding shelter becomes the immediate priority. Willem remembers a charcoal burner's hut somewhere in these woods, abandoned years ago, but potentially still standing. You spread out in a careful search pattern, always keeping the others in sight. The forest seems to swallow sound, making even your whispered conversations feel dangerous. Every snapped twig, every rustle of movement sends adrenaline racing through your system. Maria's baby chooses this moment to begin crying, his wails echoing through the trees like a dinner bell for any Mongol patrol that might be following. You watch her rock him desperately, trying to soothe the child, while tears stream down her face. The sound is heartbreaking, but it's also potentially deadly. Historians still argue whether the Mongols actually used tracking techniques in their European campaigns, but you're not willing to bet your life on scholarly debates. The hut, when you finally locate it, is a ramshackle structure of logs and mud that looks like it might collapse if you sneeze too hard. But it has a roof, mostly intact, and walls that will block the wind. More importantly, it has a small fire pit with a hole in the roof for smoke. You could actually build a fire here without immediately advertising your location to every enemy within 10 miles. As your group settles into the cramped space, you begin to understand the true scope of your situation. You're not just hiding from the Mongols, you're trying to survive a Hungarian winter without proper shelter, adequate food, or sufficient clothing. The temperature tonight will drop well below freezing, and you have perhaps enough firewood for a few hours of warmth. Tomorrow you'll need to find food and water and more fuel, all while avoiding the patrols that are certainly searching for survivors like yourself. Willem organizes the group with the same methodical approach he once brought to building houses. The strongest will gather firewood and hunt for food. The women will tend the fire and care for the children. Everyone will take turns standing watch, listening for the sound of approaching horses. It's a sensible division of labor, but you can see the fear in everyone's eyes. You're playing a game where the stakes are life and death, and the rules keep changing. The first night in the forest teaches you things about cold that you never wanted to learn. Even with a fire, even huddled together for warmth, the chill seeps into your bones and stays there. You doze fitfully, waking every time the wind shifts or a branch creaks. In your dreams, you hear hoofbeats and the whistle of arrows, and you wake with your heart pounding and your breath forming clouds in the frigid air. 3 days of forest survival have taught you that hunger and cold are almost as dangerous as Mongol arrows, but at least you're still alive. That changes when Willem spots the smoke rising from beyond the eastern ridge, thick black columns that can only mean one thing. The Mongols have reached Baksa, the fortified town where you'd hoped to find sanctuary. You watch the distant smoke with growing dread, knowing that if a proper castle can't stop these invaders, your ragtag group of survivors has no chance at all. The castle of Baksa sits on a rocky outcropping that overlooks the river valley, its stone walls rising 40 feet above the surrounding countryside. You've seen those walls many times during market days, admiring their smooth-cut blocks and thinking them impregnable. The local Lord Count Miklos commands a garrison of perhaps 50 men-at-arms plus crossbowmen and the usual assortment of servants and craftsmen. More importantly, the castle has provisions for a long siege and a well that draws from an underground spring. But as you creep closer through the forest, staying low and moving only when the wind covers the sound of your passage, you realize that the Mongols have brought something new to this siege. The rhythmic pounding that echoes across the valley isn't the sound of battering rams or conventional siege engines. It's something else entirely, a deep, resonant percussion that seems to shake the very ground beneath your feet. From your hidden position among the pine trees, you can see the Mongol siege camp spread across the valley floor like a well-organized city. Hundreds of felt tents arranged in perfect rows, horse lines that stretch for nearly a mile, and in the center, the machines that are producing that terrifying sound. You've never seen anything like them, great wooden contraptions that seem to throw massive stones with mechanical precision. Each impact sends a shower of stone chips flying from the castle walls. The siege engines are operated by crews of specialists who work with the same quiet efficiency you witnessed during the village raid. They're not just hurling rocks randomly, they're systematically targeting specific sections of the wall, methodically weakening the fortification's structural integrity. It's engineering warfare on a scale that makes European siegecraft look like children's games. One of the machines launches what appears to be a pot of some kind, and when it strikes the castle wall, it explodes in a burst of flame and smoke. Historians still argue whether the Mongols actually used gunpowder in their European campaigns, but what you're witnessing certainly looks like some kind of explosive device. The defenders on the walls scatter from the blast, and you can hear their shouts of alarm even at this distance. Whatever that substance is, it's clearly something the castle's garrison has never encountered before. The most disturbing aspect of the siege isn't the advanced technology, it's the patience. The Mongols aren't trying to storm the walls in a fit of rage or desperation. They're conducting a methodical reduction of the fortress, timing their bombardment to maximize psychological impact on the defenders. Between each volley, they wait just long enough for the garrison to begin hoping the attack is over, then resume with devastating precision. You notice that the Mongols have completely surrounded the castle, cutting off all escape routes and supply lines. Unlike European sieges, where armies often leave gaps in their encirclement, these invaders have stationed mounted patrols at every possible exit point. It's a level of tactical thoroughness that speaks to their experience in conquering fortified positions across Asia and the Middle East. From the castle walls, you can see the desperate attempts of the defenders to respond. They're shooting crossbow bolts at the siege engines, but the range is too great for effective counter-battery fire. A group of knights attempts a sortie, charging out of the main gate in a desperate attempt to destroy one of the machines. You watch in horrified fascination as they're cut down by converging fire from multiple directions. The Mongols have anticipated this exact response and positioned their archers accordingly. The psychological warfare is as sophisticated as the military engineering. The Mongols have constructed a large wooden platform visible from the castle walls, and they're using it to display captured banners and weapons taken from previous conquests. The message is clear: this is what happens to those who resist. It's a form of intimidation that goes beyond mere violence. It's systematic demoralization designed to break the defender's will to fight. As night falls, the siege continues with an intensity that catches you completely off guard. The Mongols have brought torches and braziers, allowing them to maintain their bombardment around the clock. The constant pounding of stone against stone creates a rhythm that seems to synchronize with your heartbeat, a percussion of doom that makes sleep impossible even in your forest hiding place. Maria's baby, who had finally begun to adapt to the cold and hunger, starts crying again at the sound of the distant bombardment. She rocks him desperately, but the child seems to sense the tension in the air. Even the local wildlife has been affected. The usual night sounds of the forest have been replaced by an eerie silence, as if every living thing is holding its breath. By dawn, you can see that the castle walls have been breached in at least 3 places. The Mongol siege engines have done their work with mechanical precision, creating gaps that infantry can exploit. But instead of immediately launching an assault, the attackers seem to be waiting for something. The bombardment continues, but at a reduced rate, as if the Mongols are conserving their ammunition for the final phase of the siege. The end comes with shocking suddenness. A section of the western wall, weakened by hours of bombardment, simply collapses in a cascade of stone and mortar. The Mongols pour through the breach like water through a broken dam, and within minutes, the sounds of combat echo from within the castle courtyard. The siege that should have lasted weeks has been completed in less than 2 days. As smoke begins to rise from inside the castle walls, you realize that your last hope of organized resistance has been eliminated. The Mongols have demonstrated that even the strongest fortifications can't protect you from their advanced siege technology and tactical sophistication. You're truly on your own now, with nowhere to run, and winter closing in around you like a frozen fist. The destruction of Baksa Castle marks the beginning of something far worse than random raids. It's the start of systematic devastation that will transform the entire landscape into a frozen wasteland. From your forest hiding place, you watch columns of smoke rising from a dozen different directions as the Mongols implement their doctrine of total warfare. They're not just conquering territory, they're erasing it, removing every trace of human civilization with the thoroughness of a forest fire. The technique is brutally efficient. The Mongols have divided their army into smaller units, each responsible for a specific sector of the countryside. You can track their progress by the smoke plumes that appear with clockwork regularity. First the village of St. Martin to the north, then the monastery at Calvaria, then the trading post at the river crossing. Each location burns for exactly the same amount of time, suggesting a standardized procedure that's been refined through countless campaigns. What makes this destruction particularly terrifying is how the Mongols have adapted their tactics to winter conditions. They're using the frozen rivers as highways, allowing their cavalry to move at speeds that would be impossible during the warmer months. The hard-packed snow provides excellent footing for their horses, while the bare trees offer no concealment for potential ambushes. Winter, which should have been your ally, has become the Mongols' greatest tactical advantage. You witness this firsthand when a patrol of 20 riders uses the frozen stream below your hiding place as a road. They move in perfect formation, their horses' hooves barely making a sound on the ice. Each rider carries a burning brand, and as they pass beneath overhanging branches, they casually set fire to anything combustible. It's arson conducted with the casual efficiency of someone lighting candles for dinner. The psychological impact of this systematic burning is almost as devastating as the physical destruction. The Mongols understand that fire speaks to something primal in the human mind. It's not just about destroying buildings, but about breaking the will of anyone who might be watching. Each new column of smoke sends a message nowhere is safe. Resistance is futile, and the old world is ending one building at a time. Willem, who has been growing weaker from his untreated wounds, makes an observation that chills you more than the winter wind. They're not just destroying randomly, he whispers, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. They're targeting specific types of buildings, churches, mills, anything that brings people together. It's a level of strategic thinking that goes beyond mere military conquest. The Mongols are attacking the very social fabric that holds communities together. The innovation in their fire-starting techniques is remarkable in a horrifying way. You watch through gaps in the trees as Mongol specialists use arrows with specially designed heads that carry burning material much more effectively than simple torches. Some arrows seem to burn with an unnaturally bright flame, possibly indicating the use of some kind of chemical accelerant. It's military technology applied to the science of destruction. Historians still argue whether the Mongols deliberately targeted civilian populations or simply accepted collateral damage as inevitable, but from your vantage point, the distinction seems meaningless. The result is the same: entire communities are being systematically eliminated, not just killed, but erased from existence. Even the graveyards are being desecrated, the wooden markers burned, and the stone monuments toppled. The most disturbing aspect of this campaign is how the Mongols have turned winter itself into a weapon. They're timing their attacks to coincide with the harshest weather, when potential victims are most vulnerable and least able to flee. The combination of military assault and environmental extremes creates a situation where survival becomes nearly impossible. You're not just fighting human enemies, you're fighting the season itself. Your own situation is becoming increasingly desperate. The food you scavenged from the village is nearly gone, and the forest offers precious little sustenance in the dead of winter. Maria's baby has developed a cough that sounds ominously wet, and several of the children are showing signs of frostbite. The Mongols don't need to find you. Starvation and exposure will do their work for them. The sound of approaching horses sends your group deeper into the forest, but you're beginning to realize that hiding is only a temporary solution. The Mongols are conducting a systematic sweep of the entire region, burning every structure and killing every living thing they encounter. It's not warfare in any traditional sense. It's ecological destruction conducted with military precision. From a ridge overlooking the valley, you can see the full scope of the devastation. What was once a thriving agricultural region dotted with villages and farms has become a blackened wasteland. The Mongols have even burned the haystacks and grain stores, ensuring that anyone who might have survived the initial attacks will starve before spring arrives. It's scorched earth tactics elevated to an art form. The efficiency of this destruction is what makes it so terrifying. There's no wasted motion, no unnecessary cruelty for its own sake. The Mongols are simply following a proven formula for conquest that they've refined across thousands of miles and dozens of campaigns. What you're witnessing isn't personal, it's professional. You're being eliminated not out of hatred, but out of policy. As another village erupts in flames to the east, you realize that you're watching the end of your world. The medieval Hungarian countryside that your ancestors built over centuries is being systematically erased in a matter of weeks. The Mongols aren't just conquering territory, they're rewriting the very landscape, transforming a lived-in human environment into an empty stage for their empire. The smoke from all these fires has begun to affect the weather itself, creating a perpetual twilight that makes the winter days seem even shorter and more oppressive. The sun, when it manages to penetrate the smoke, appears as a dim red disk that provides no warmth. You're living in an artificial winter, a man-made apocalypse that extends far beyond the natural harshness of the season. The sound that wakes you from your fitful sleep isn't the distant thunder of hoofbeats or the crack of burning timber. It's the unmistakable clash of steel against steel, close enough that you can hear individual sword strokes and the screams of wounded men. Through the bare branches of your forest shelter, you see flashes of movement in the valley below where a desperate battle is unfolding. A force of Hungarian knights, perhaps 50 strong, has somehow managed to engage a Mongol column in direct combat. You watch in fascination and horror as these two military systems collide with devastating force. The Hungarian knights, resplendent in their mail hauberks and colorful surcoats, charge with the traditional tactics that have dominated European warfare for centuries. Their heavy cavalry hits the Mongol line like a thunderbolt lances splintering against leather armor and shields. For a moment, it seems like the Christian knights might actually break through their superior armor and weapons, giving them a crucial advantage in close combat. But the Mongols respond with tactical sophistication that quickly turns the tide. Instead of meeting the charge head-on, they execute a maneuver you've never seen before, a controlled retreat that draws the knights into an extended formation, then a sudden wheel around that brings fresh riders attacking from the flanks. It's like watching a chess master toy, with an amateur each move calculated to exploit the Europeans' tactical rigidity. The Hungarian knights, committed to their charge, can't adapt quickly enough to this fluid style of warfare. Their heavy armor, which provides excellent protection against swords and lances, becomes a liability when facing the Mongols' composite bows. You watch in growing horror as arrow after arrow finds the gaps in their mail, targeting the spaces between helmet and coif, the joints in arm and leg, protection the vulnerable spots that only expert archers would know to exploit. What strikes you most forcefully is how the Mongols maintain their discipline, even in the heat of battle. There's no wild cheering or bloodthirsty roaring, just the quiet efficiency of professionals doing their job. They communicate through hand signals and brief whistle calls, coordinating their movements with the precision of a well-rehearsed dance. It's warfare elevated to the level of performance art, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. The battle takes place on a frozen meadow that provides perfect footing for cavalry maneuvers, but the Mongols have somehow managed to choose the ground, even though they're supposedly being pursued. You begin to realize that this entire engagement might be a deliberate trap designed to lure the Hungarian knights into a killing ground where their tactical advantages become meaningless. The Mongols have studied European warfare and designed specific countermeasures for its strengths. From your elevated position, you can see the broader tactical picture that the knights themselves probably can't perceive. The Mongol force they're engaging is actually just the center of a much larger formation. Additional units are moving through the forest on either side, preparing to complete an encirclement. The Hungarian knights are about to be surrounded by an enemy that can strike from any direction while remaining largely immune to retaliation. The sound of the battle is unlike anything you've experienced. European combat usually involves a lot of shouting and clash of heavy weapons, but this engagement has an eerie quality of controlled violence. The Mongols fight in near silence, their composite bows producing only the soft whisper of arrows in flight. Even their horses seem quieter, as if they've been trained to minimize noise during combat operations. Historians still argue whether European heavy cavalry was actually superior to Mongol horse archers in direct combat, but what you're witnessing suggests that tactical context matters more than individual prowess. The knights who break through the Mongol line are devastatingly effective, but they're being systematically isolated and eliminated by superior numbers and coordination. Quality is losing to quantity and tactical sophistication. One Hungarian knight, his surcoat bearing the red cross of the Templars, manages to reach the Mongol standard bearer and engage him in single combat. For a moment, it's like watching a scene from the epic poems, two warriors locked in mortal combat while the battle rages around them. The knight's superior armor and weapons give him a clear advantage, and you find yourself silently cheering as he forces the Mongol back. But even this moment of heroic triumph is turned against the Christians. The Mongol commander uses the knight's success as a distraction, ordering his reserves to attack the Hungarian flanks while their attention is focused on the individual duel. It's a coldly pragmatic decision that sacrifices the standard bearer to achieve a larger tactical advantage. The Mongols don't fight for glory or honor, they fight to win. The end comes with shocking suddenness. One moment, the Hungarian knights are fighting with desperate courage. The next, they're being overwhelmed by converging attacks from multiple directions. The Mongol encirclement is complete, and what began as a cavalry charge has become a massacre. You watch as the surviving knights are systematically hunted down, their heavy armor making escape impossible in the deep snow. The aftermath is almost as disturbing as the battle itself. The Mongols move efficiently through the field, finishing off the wounded and stripping the dead of anything valuable. They show no particular cruelty, but also no mercy. It's simply part of their standard operating procedure. The Hungarian knights, who rode out this morning as the flower of Christian chivalry, are now just obstacles to be cleared from the battlefield. As the Mongols prepare to move on, you notice something that makes your blood run cold. One of their scouts is pointing directly at your forest hiding place, and a small group of riders is detaching from the main force to investigate. Your passive observation of the battle has somehow been detected, and now you're about to become participants in this deadly game. The distinction between observer and victim is about to disappear, and you realize that nowhere is truly safe from the methodical killers. The sound of horses climbing the hill toward your position forces a decision you hoped you'd never have to make. Do you run deeper into the forest and risk exposure, or do you stay hidden and hope the Mongols give up their search? Either choice could mean death, but at least running gives you the illusion of control over your fate. The weeks that follow the battle become a nightmare of gradual adaptation to a world where the Mongols are no longer invaders, but occupiers. You watch from your increasingly desperate forest hideout as they establish a systematic administration over the conquered territory, transforming the familiar landscape of your childhood into something alien and efficient. The random destruction has given way to organized exploitation, and somehow this feels even more terrifying than the initial violence. The Mongols have established a base camp in the ruins of Baksa Castle, and from your vantage point on the forested hills, you can observe their daily routines with growing unease. They've repaired the damaged walls with remarkable speed, using techniques that seem to blend Asian engineering with captured European labor. The result is a fortress that looks subtly wrong, familiar stones arranged in patterns that follow no architectural tradition you recognize. What disturbs you most is how quickly they've imposed order on the chaos they created. The survivors from various destroyed villages have been rounded up and organized into work gangs, each assigned specific tasks under Mongol supervision. You recognize faces from your own community among the laborers, people you've known since childhood, now moving with the mechanical precision of the conquered. They're not prisoners exactly, but they're certainly not free. The efficiency of this occupation system is breathtaking in its scope. The Mongols have conducted a census of the surviving population, cataloging not just numbers, but skills ages and potential usefulness. The blacksmiths have been put to work forging arrowheads and repairing weapons. The farmers are being directed to prepare fields for spring planting, though you notice they're planting different crops, hardy grains that can feed cavalry horses rather than the wheat and barley your people traditionally grew. Your own situation has become increasingly desperate as the occupation solidifies. The forest that once seemed like sanctuary is now systematically patrolled by Mongol hunting parties who know the terrain better than you do. They've recruited local guides collaborators who've traded their knowledge of hidden paths and secret places for the promise of survival. Every day brings new evidence that your hiding places are being mapped and cataloged. Willem's condition has deteriorated to the point where he can barely walk, and Maria's baby has developed a persistent fever that no amount of bundling can cure. The other children are showing signs of malnutrition, their faces gaunt and their movements sluggish. You're all slowly starving, but the alternative surrender to the Mongols feels like a different kind of death. The psychological pressure is almost worse than the physical deprivation. You can see smoke rising from the occupied settlements, but it's not the black smoke of destruction, it's the gray smoke of cooking fires and workshops. Life is continuing down there, but it's a life transformed by conquest into something you barely recognize. The Mongols aren't just occupying your territory, they're restructuring your entire way of existence. Historians still argue whether the Mongol occupation system was designed to benefit the conquered populations or simply to extract maximum value from them, but from your perspective, the distinction seems academic. The people working in the valley below might be fed and housed, but they're also being systematically converted into components of a vast military machine. Their children are being taught Mongol customs, their craftsmen are producing Mongol equipment, and their farmers are growing Mongol crops. The most unsettling aspect of this transformation is how voluntary much of it appears to be. You watch through your crude spyglass a piece of broken glass from the monastery as local leaders meet with Mongol administrators in what looks like genuine negotiation. Some of your former neighbors seem to be adapting to the new order with disturbing enthusiasm, perhaps recognizing that collaboration offers better prospects than resistance. The Mongols have also begun recruiting from the local population, offering positions in their administration to anyone who demonstrates useful skills. You recognize the village scribe among a group of men wearing Mongol-style clothing, apparently serving as translators or record keepers. The sight fills you with a complex mixture of revulsion and envy. Revulsion at the betrayal, envy at the warm meals and secure shelter that collaboration provides. The weather has become an additional enemy as the occupation settles into routine. The winter of 1241 is proving to be particularly harsh, with temperatures that make survival in the forest nearly impossible. Your improvised shelters provide minimal protection against the wind, and the constant search for firewood has become a deadly game of cat and mouse with Mongol patrols. Food has become an obsession that dominates every waking moment. You've learned to eat things that would have disgusted you months ago: tree bark roots, anything that might provide a few calories of nutrition. The children cry constantly from hunger, and you've begun to understand why some parents might choose to surrender their families rather than watch them slowly starve. The Mongols seem to understand the psychology of starvation warfare perfectly. They've deliberately left gaps in their patrols places where desperate refugees might try to scavenge for food. But these apparent opportunities are actually traps designed to capture the remnants of the resistance movement. You've watched several groups of forest dwellers walk into these snares drawn by the promise of abandoned supplies that turn out to be bait. The most demoralizing aspect of the occupation is how normal it's beginning to seem. The Mongol patrols that once terrified you have become part of the landscape, as predictable as sunrise and sunset. You find yourself timing your movements around their schedules, adapting to their presence rather than actively resisting it. The transformation from free peasant to hunted refugee to reluctant coexistence feels like a betrayal of everything you once believed about yourself. As winter deepens and your supplies dwindle, you begin to understand that the Mongols have won not just a military victory, but a psychological one. They've created a situation where survival depends on acceptance of their rule, where resistance means slow death, and where collaboration offers the only realistic path forward. The choice is becoming increasingly clear: submit or perish in the frozen wilderness. The first warm breeze of early spring carries promises that feel like lies. The scent of melting snow and awakening earth should herald hope, but instead it brings the terrifying realization that your winter of hiding is ending. The forest that concealed you during the frozen months is beginning to bud with new growth, and every day brings more light, more visibility, more exposure to the Mongol patrols that have systematically tightened their grip on the countryside. You watch from your increasingly precarious hiding place as the occupied settlements below transform with the changing season. The Mongols have spent the winter months planning, organizing, and consolidating their control, and now they're implementing the next phase of their conquest. Work gangs are clearing fields, repairing roads, and constructing new buildings that follow architectural patterns you've never seen before. It's not restoration, it's replacement, the systematic erasure of your culture in favor of something alien and efficient. The most disturbing development is how the collaborators have multiplied over the winter months. What began as a handful of desperate survivors willing to work for food has evolved into a functioning administrative class that seems genuinely committed to the new order. You recognize the village priest among a group of men in Mongol dress, apparently serving as some kind of cultural liaison. The sight fills you with a rage so pure it temporarily overwhelms your exhaustion and hunger. Willem died 2 days ago, his body finally succumbing to the combination of untreated wounds, inadequate shelter, and the grinding stress of constant fear. You buried him in the half-frozen ground, with your bare hands marking his grave with a simple wooden cross that you'll have to remove before the next patrol passes. His death feels like the end of an era. He was the last connection to the world that existed before the Mongols came. Maria's baby didn't survive the winter either, though she continues to carry the small bundle as if he were still alive. The other children look at her with a mixture of pity and terror, understanding instinctively that she's crossed some invisible line into madness. Her soft lullabies echo through the forest at night, a sound that's both heartbreaking and dangerous, the kind of noise that could draw unwanted attention from the increasingly frequent patrols. The spring thaw has revealed evidence of the winter's toll scattered throughout the forest. You find the remains of other refugee groups, families that didn't survive the cold, individuals who died alone in makeshift shelters, children who simply wandered away from their parents and froze. The Mongols didn't need to hunt down every survivor. Winter did most of their work for them. The psychological impact of these discoveries is devastating. Each frozen corpse reminds you that your survival has been largely a matter of luck rather than skill or planning. You could have been any of these people, and with spring bringing new challenges, you still might be. The forest that once felt like sanctuary now feels like a cemetery populated by the ghosts of those who shared your desperate hope and failed to see another season. The Mongols have begun conducting what appears to be a systematic survey of the entire region, mapping every trail, cataloging every resource, and documenting every hiding place. You watch surveyor teams moving through the forest with instruments you don't recognize, creating detailed charts that will make future resistance virtually impossible. They're not just occupying your territory, they're claiming it with the thoroughness of cartographers. Historians still argue whether the Mongol administration was more efficient than the European systems it replaced, but from your perspective, as a hunted refugee, the question seems irrelevant. Efficiency in service of conquest is still conquest, and the systematic nature of their control makes it feel more oppressive than simple tyranny. They've created a machine of governance that functions without mercy or flexibility. The most crushing realization is how the changing season has altered the fundamental dynamics of your situation. The snow that once covered your tracks is melting, revealing paths and hiding places that were invisible during the winter months. The bare branches that provided concealment are sprouting leaves, but they're also making movement more difficult and noisy. Nature itself seems to be conspiring against your continued resistance. Food remains a constant obsession, but spring brings new possibilities and new dangers. You can forage for early plants and roots, but you can also be spotted more easily while doing so. The game animals are returning to their normal patterns, but so are the hunters, both human and animal, who prey on them. Every advantage comes with a corresponding risk that makes survival feel like a complex equation with no clear solution. The psychological pressure of isolation has begun to take its toll on your remaining companions. Arguments break out over trivial matters: who gets to sleep closest to the fire, who ate more than their share of the meager rations, who made too much noise during the night. The social bonds that held your group together during the darkest months are fraying under the stress of prolonged deprivation and fear. You find yourself fantasizing about surrender with increasing frequency. The people working in the valley below appear to be adequately fed and housed, and while they're clearly not free, they're also not slowly starving in the wilderness. The Mongol occupation has developed a routine that includes regular meal times, organized work schedules, and the basic security of knowing where you'll sleep each night. These simple comforts have begun to seem like unimaginable luxuries. The irony is not lost on you that spring, the season of renewal and hope, has become the most dangerous time of your ordeal. The natural world that should be celebrating life and growth has instead become a countdown to your inevitable discovery. Every bird that returns from its winter migration, every flower that blooms in the forest, clearings every day of increasing sunlight, brings you closer to the moment when hiding will no longer be possible. As you huddle in your deteriorating shelter, listening to Maria's mad lullabies and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, you realize that the Mongols have achieved something more devastating than military conquest. They've created a situation where hope itself has become a form of torture, where the promise of spring feels like a death sentence rather than a blessing. The end comes not with the thunder of hoofbeats or the whistle of arrows, but with a simple announcement that reaches your forest hiding place through the voices of Mongol heralds riding through the countryside. The great Khan Ogadai is dead, they proclaim, in accented but understandable Hungarian, and the armies of the West must return to Karakorum for the election of a new supreme ruler. The words drift through the spring air like pollen, carrying with them the promise of something you'd almost forgotten existed: the possibility of survival. You watch from your concealment as the systematic dismantling of the occupation begins with the same methodical efficiency that characterized its establishment. The Mongol administrators don't simply abandon their posts. They conduct an orderly withdrawal that includes detailed instructions for the collaborators who will maintain basic governance until further notice. It's a level of organizational sophistication that makes European political systems look primitive by comparison. The first sign of change comes when the patrols that have haunted your forest for months begin to thin out their regular schedules, disrupted by the demands of preparation for the long journey east. You notice that the Mongol scouts, who once moved through the woods with predatory confidence, now seem distracted, their attention focused on logistics rather than hunting refugees. For the first time since the invasion began, you can move during daylight hours without the constant fear of discovery. The transformation in the valley below is remarkable to witness. The work gangs that had been constructing new buildings and clearing fields are suddenly reassigned to different tasks, packing supplies, preparing horses, and dismantling the more sophisticated equipment that the Mongols don't want to leave behind. The occupation that seemed so permanent is revealing itself to be temporary, a military expedition rather than a true conquest. Maria, who has been carrying her dead baby throughout the long winter, finally seems to understand that he's gone. She buries the small bundle beneath a flowering apple tree, speaking words in a language that sounds like prayer but contains too much pain to be entirely holy. The spring sunshine filters through the new leaves, casting patterns of light and shadow that make the moment feel almost peaceful despite its underlying tragedy. The psychological impact of the Mongol withdrawal is complex and contradictory. Relief at the prospect of survival mingles with a strange sense of loss. The world that existed before the invasion is gone forever, and what's emerging in its place is neither the old order nor the new one the Mongols would have imposed. You're witnessing the birth of something unprecedented, a society that has been fundamentally altered by the experience of conquest and occupation. The collaborators face the most difficult adjustment. Some flee with the withdrawing army, recognizing that their former neighbors are unlikely to forgive their cooperation with the occupiers. Others attempt to resume their old roles, pretending that nothing has changed. A few seem genuinely confused, caught between two worlds, with no clear path forward. The social fabric that held your community together has been permanently altered. Historians still argue whether the Mongol withdrawal was primarily motivated by the succession crisis or by the practical difficulties of maintaining control over European territories. But from your perspective, the reason matters less than the result. The machinery of occupation is being dismantled, and the suffocating sense of permanent subjugation is lifting like fog before the morning sun. The process of returning to normal life proves more difficult than you anticipated. Months of hiding in the forest have left you physically weakened and psychologically scarred. The simple act of walking on a road instead of creeping through underbrush feels dangerously exposed. The sound of church bells, which once marked the familiar rhythm of village life, now makes you flinch as if expecting an attack. The landscape itself bears permanent scars from the Mongol occupation. Fields that were replanted with different crops will need to be converted back to traditional grains. Buildings constructed according to Asian architectural principles will need to be modified or demolished. The very geography of settlement patterns has been altered, with some villages relocated to more defensible positions, while others have been abandoned entirely. The most profound change is in the people themselves. Those who survived the Winter of Terror carry a knowledge that can never be unlearned, the understanding that their world is not permanent, that their way of life can be swept away by forces beyond their control or comprehension. The innocence of medieval isolation has been permanently shattered by contact with a military machine that operates on a global scale. As you emerge from your forest hiding place and begin the slow process of returning to something resembling normal life, you realize that the Mongol invasion has achieved something more lasting than political conquest. It has introduced European civilization to its own mortality, forcing a confrontation with the reality that their Christian kingdom is not the center of the world, but merely one small part of a vast and dangerous universe. The spring of 1242 brings new growth to the damaged countryside, but it also brings the recognition that winter will come again, and with it the possibility of new invasions, new conquerors, new tests of survival. The Mongols have withdrawn, but they've left behind a changed world where the future feels less certain and the past seems impossibly distant. The withdrawal continues throughout the summer, a gradual exodus that leaves behind empty camps and abandoned fortifications. Some Mongol soldiers remain either by choice or circumstance, and they begin the process of integration into European society. Their presence serves as a permanent reminder of the invasion, living proof that the world has been fundamentally altered by the events of 1241. As autumn approaches, and you help with the harvest of fields that were planted by foreign hands, you understand that you've witnessed the end of one historical era and the beginning of another. The medieval world that existed before the Mongols came was defined by isolation and local concerns. The world that emerges from their withdrawal is connected to larger forces, more aware of its place in a global context, and forever changed by the knowledge that isolation is no longer possible. The last snow has melted and the forests are green again, but the silence feels different now, deeper, more complete. You've learned to recognize the difference between the quiet of peace and the quiet of waiting, and this feels like the latter. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the great wheel of history continues to turn, grinding through seasons and centuries, with the patient persistence of stone wearing away mountains. The village you're helping to rebuild will never be quite the same as the one that burned. The new houses follow slightly different patterns, informed by hard lessons about defense and survival. The people move with a wariness that wasn't there before, their conversations frequently interrupted by glances toward the eastern horizon. They've learned to sleep lightly, to keep their belongings ready for travel, to remember that permanence is an illusion. But there's something else too, a resilience that surprises even you. The human capacity for adaptation, for finding joy, even in the shadow of terrible memories, proves stronger than any army. Children play in the reconstructed streets, their laughter echoing off walls that have been built to withstand the next invasion. Gardens bloom where siege engines once stood, and the apple trees bear fruit that tastes sweeter for having survived the winter of terror. You've become a keeper of stories, now one of the few who remembers what came before and witnessed what happened during. The responsibility feels heavier than any physical burden, but it's also oddly comforting. To remember is to honor those who didn't survive, to ensure that their suffering wasn't meaningless. The dead speak through your memories, and their voices remind you that survival is not just about living, but about understanding why living matters. The seasons turn as they always have and always will. Summer gives way to autumn, to winter, to spring, in the endless cycle that connects all human experience. But now you know something that previous generations could only imagine, that history is not a distant abstraction, but a living force that can arrive on horseback, transform everything you thought you knew, and then disappear into the vastness of time and space. The world grows quiet around you, settling into the peaceful rhythm of evening. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls the hour its bronze voice, carrying across fields that have been planted and harvested, burned and replanted in the eternal cycle of destruction and renewal. The sound is both familiar and strange, an echo of continuity in a world that has learned to expect change. Sleep comes easier now, though it never comes without dreams. In your dreams, you sometimes hear the distant thunder of hoofbeats, but you no longer wake in terror. You've learned that even the worst storms eventually pass, that even the longest nights eventually give way to dawn, and that the human spirit, however battered, finds ways to endure, adapt, and ultimately prevail. Rest now and let the gentle rhythm of your breathing match the eternal rhythm of the world itself, breathing in and breathing out season following season in the endless dance of time and memory and hope.